Hello and welcome to the first of the third series of Purple Ivy Brown Bag Conversations. And I'm here with Hanna from Autocirc and Arash from Alder. Hello. And to everybody who's joining us, I hope you all have a delicious sandwich in your hands. We'll try to make your lunch time as interesting as possible. The topic that we are discussing today is innovation. And of course, sustainability, it's a word full of concepts, full of words, of many things. It's full of principles and full of values. But what we'll be doing today is we'll be diving in and getting our hands dirty, talking about sustainability in action in a business that is really working at the front of creating a sustainable future. So I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves. So Hanna, tell me who you are and what Autocirc does. Hanna.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. My name is Hanna and I'm the CSO of Autocirc, and CSO is the head of sustainability. And Autocirc is a group within the aftermarket of the automotive sector. And we are based in Sweden and we have subsidiaries around the Northern Europe. So as of today, we are 25 companies within the group, and the group consists of dismantlers, remanufacturers, workshops, scrap and metal traders, and also a company that handles end-of-life tires and rims in order to increase the recycling of those materials. And Autocirc strives to create more opportunities to reuse of spare parts of cars that are being put to the end-of-life state of a car. Say.
Thank you. And Arash, tell us about Alder and about Alder's relationship, your relationship to Autocirc.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Arash, Raisse, partner at Alder. Alder, we are a sustainability fund with about 300 million euros of capital that we invest into sustainable companies, typically Northern Europe, companies within the size of 100, 200, 300 million Swedish kroner, with the ambition to grow them 2, 3, 4, 5 times over the course of 5-7 years before we sell them further to somebody that will take the flag further on. My role is one of the lead partners. We're currently 6, and I'm the responsible partner for Autocirc. Our journey started roughly 2 years ago when I met Matthias and Johan, the founders of Autocirc, where we basically, over a cup of coffee, came up with the idea of how can we realize their vision of building Autocirc and the leading reusable aftermarket player in Europe. And so we started off on a handkerchief and said, let's do this. And now 2 years later, I think we are above 100 million euros or 1 billion SEK of turnover with 15% profitability and are taking over Europe in very fast pace. So ask me again in 2 months and we probably have doubled the size.
Wow, that sounds really, really exciting. So my name is Rebecca Oliver, and I'm a sustainability strategist at Purple Ivy, and we focus on the future, helping companies prepare for a sustainable future. And now I'd like to maybe just kick off the conversation by saying, well, Hanna, cars, your companies aren't that new, all of them. What's the innovation in the Autocirc model? What's new that you're doing that nobody else is doing?
Yeah, so I think for Autocirc, the innovation is the business model in its whole. And I think that's also is the advantage of Autocirc, that our business model is based on circular flows. And we are connecting several players within the aftermarkets in order to create circular flows, in order to create a higher amount of reuse of these spare parts, in order to create a more sustainable repair of a car when you can use a used product instead of a new production product.
And are there areas of your work where you're really keeping some of the elements from cars out of the waste stream and moving them into a new market?
I think that within this field or the aftermarkets of the automotive sector, we always been working with the reuse. But the advantage of our Autocirc and connecting these players within the aftermarket, we are connecting dismantlers and remanufacturers and workshops in order to create the opportunity for a spare part to either go to reuse straight away from the dismantler to a workshop, or going through a remanufacturer in order to create a usable product of something that before maybe was classified as waste. So we are increasing the amount of spare parts that can be reused within the aftermarket. And these players have been there before and historically as well. But now when they are within one group, that Autocirc are, the connection or they get the connections from the different players, and we are creating a spider web within the aftermarket in order to make it easier for these players to collaborate and in order to reach out to each other.
So you're really speeding up the wheel with both cost efficiencies and practical efficiencies. Can you maybe give an example of something that is an advantage of being part of Autocirc that wouldn't have been there before, that maybe is missing?
So when we explain it, we say that we are connecting specialists within the field. So we have specialists within all the different subsidiaries within the group, and together we're creating a generalistic view or and these kind of things. So we are taking the good parts out of every company in order to create a business or a group that have plenty of competence and plenty of innovation thoughts, that we can create a better aftermarket in order to reuse, in order to increase the reuse of spare parts.
And Arash, what did you particularly get so excited about on that first meeting with the founders? You clearly saw whatever it was that made you interest.
Well, I think, Rebecca, I think it ultimately boiled down to the combination of both having existing businesses, because we're talking about innovation and everyone thinks innovation, wow, it has to be something fantastic. But really taking a traditional market and taking a novel spin on it, I think it's ultimately what sustainability is all about. Because many times currently public markets think about, or from an investor perspective, that you have to invest in solar, wind, or something that is more novel, something that is uncertain and something that is new. Whereas our take has ultimately been that taking existing businesses that have been around for maybe 2 or 3 generations, and how you can from there build novel concepts that fundamentally builds on the practice of common knowledge. Just use your kind of common sense. So I think that was really the appetite here, taking something that is existing and put a new spin on it. And from that is completely innovative for us, and it makes it investable as opposed to something that, hi, can we get 100 million and we're gonna drill a hole and let's see how that goes.
So we were talking earlier, because we've been sort of chatting a bit before we came online, that we were talking about value chains. It's very easy to talk about innovation, as you said, as one new thing, but this is really about a new value chain. But Hanna, you mentioned this. It's not, you have a aftermarket. You have part of the value chain from end of life, trying to build that, bend around the curve so that all of the parts of the product come back on the market. But you can see parts of the value chain that are not necessarily helping you. You talked about design. Tell us a little bit about how that, the part of the value chain you don't have control of, is maybe an area where innovation can also emerge.
Yeah, I think that when we're talking about the core values within the circular economy, we are talking about the reduce of consumptions, and we are talking about we need to reuse more, but we also talk about the design of products and design for these circular flows. And I think that as of now, we are still, or this sector is still lacking a bit within the design for circular flows in the production state, the OEMs. So I think that will be a cool way to create further opportunities to reuse of these old spare parts, let's say, or the already used ones.
Are you seeing that newer cars are already thinking about reusability or recyclability, or is this a conversation that really needs to get going?
The conversation already started. I think that several brands already are creating these circular models, but I think it's still on the sketch. For this is a concept that we can create this circular car model, but I think that in order to create these circular movements or circular economy within the future, we need to have a further conversation regarding it, and also in order to be a supplier of sustainable reused products to the new production of car could be a good way in order to reduce the emissions within the production of new cars.
Mm. So just before I go on, I just want to say to our listeners, this is a conversation. If you have a free hand from your sandwich, do write a question in the chat, and we can just bring it into our conversation and move the conversation in any direction that you'd like. But the next thought that I had while we're waiting for questions is, Arash, you talked about the exit when Alder exits. What are you waiting for? What are you hoping to achieve with this investment, and when will you feel satisfied to let Autocirc grow on with other investors?
No, I think it ultimately boils down to building the concept and showcasing it as a proof of concept. Naturally, developing it, growing it, you can go on forever. This is just beginning. We're at the cusp of where we think this will end. So if you draw the longer lines of it, this could be 10, 20, 30, 40 years of development. So it's really, I think, from our perspective of being the initiator, being the one that starts it and ignites that flare or the fire. And then once that is set and you can showcase that, then I think we have at least done our part of it. And then it's ready for the next one to take it further. But what's really interesting about it is that from an investor perspective, we always think about how will the next one that will take it, how will Autocirc perform for the coming 10 years in the hands of somebody new? And if that investor doesn't think that there is a longevity in the business model, then we will have actually trouble of convincing that investor. So we always have to think about 2 or 3, let's say, exits ahead to make the business model sustainable, we call it so. So from that perspective, it really boils down to thinking about the long trends, whether if it's 10, 20, 30 years ahead, and being that ignite or ignition of starting proving the concept as such, that it's viable, that it's robust, and that it's for real.
So we have a comment here. I'll read it out to see if it stimulates some thoughts. Companies often lose on creativity and innovation because of tradition and waiting before changing. For example, Kodak didn't dare and then lost out to digital cameras. As an investor, Alder, how do you create companies for the future or understand these trends which can leave companies behind? I spun a bit on the end of that just to see a question. What are you looking for?
Well, I think ultimately it's really about, as the comment said, traditions, and maybe thinking about that you cannot move the needle by actually doing something. Whereas our concept or our thinking really resides on the fact that if you have strong management teams and entrepreneurs and people that not are slow-moving assets, as you can do in the balance sheet or income statement, but rather slow-moving assets. We want to get the assets going. So when there is a drive and when there is a vision of when you want to create something, that is what makes us tick. And the way we analyze, I mean, you can ultimately go build a robust model of what the future will look like, and you can use all kind of tools that are out there from a sustainability perspective. We have discussed a bit about taxonomy. There is science-based targets. There are maybe 10 other models. But the problem or the obstacle that many think, similar to maybe the Kodak example, is that you think about the models and you focus so much on them that you stop thinking actually what is just common sense ultimately. So when we put together common sense and drive, I think we have a very strong start or strong fundamenta to actually drive something sustainable, as opposed to just getting stuck into models and getting stuck into, well, what will happen with electrification or what will happen with scarce resource, etc. And then you're not getting the asses going. So get the asses going. That's our concept.
Thanks. And Hanna, thinking about the future of Autocirc, are you looking at places in the value chain where Autocirc can do more from a sustainability perspective? I know that as the Chief Sustainability Officer, you're understanding the profile of all the parts of the company. Can you see areas where Autocirc could move in terms of expanding and doing even more of this, consolidating a supply chain? Maybe some examples of areas that I remember you talked to me about fabrics, for example, the fabric part. And there's a number of areas that maybe could have more innovation.
Yeah, exactly. So as of now, or in this conversation, we only really talked about the use of reused parts within a car once again, but we also see that we have a concept of the reuse in another product or in another function, and that is a concept that we are investigating a lot as of now and see, okay, so we have this fabric from the car, maybe we can't reuse it in another car. How could we reuse it in another product? And actually for some weeks ago, we had a student case education with some students from several universities here in Gothenburg, and they came up with a lot of ideas of how we can use different parts of a car in another way. So we are talked about making shoes from the fabric or bags from the fabrics, and also using the glass of a car to maybe create lamps or maybe a house or something like that. So we see that we have a lot of resources that we can use in another way, and we shouldn't stare us blind just to use them in a new car. We can use it in other ways as well. So we have a lot of glass, plastic, fabrics that we are looking into and see, could we find another way to reuse them? Because we want to work with the hierarchy within waste: reduce, reuse, recycle, and we are wanting to be able to work with these two, the highest step, the reuse and reduce of waste. And we see that all the materials within a car are a resource that we can use in another way.
And I think Hanna's example is perfect. Sorry, yeah, it's just I'm just crying of happiness, because it's really about the topic of today, innovation, but rather just common sense, for crying out loud. What can you use and why get restrained and think about only the car industry and where can you use the glass or the fabrics or anything else, and in other adjacent verticals or anything else. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that these new industrial symbiosis with another sector or another company are crucial for the circular system to work. I think that that's an important way to think.
How are you working with stakeholders, Hanna? Because it seems like there's many potential new markets, and for the kind of materials that you produce. What's the process for moving to the next stage, for finding new markets, or maybe as you're working with students? Clearly, there's a lot of creativity out there. How do you connect to stakeholders that can maybe move these materials into new markets?
I think that the stakeholders, or are you talking about whoever stakeholder? Or are you talking about municipalities or?
Well, I think that there are many markets. I mean, I think you say municipalities, presumably procurement. It would be great. I know there was a whole report on how to make procurement one of the engines for new markets, for green markets. But presumably finding new uses for these materials perhaps require contact with more stakeholders than just clear markets.
I think that when we start with students, in order to get these creative ideas, we are finding new ideas, and then it's our mission to reach out to these stakeholders in order to start a conversation regarding it. And all the subsidiaries within the group is also having these conversations with the stakeholders within their area in order to find new ways. So I think it's us reaching out as of now.
Are the markets ready, or I remember speaking to a number of years ago to people within the recycling business and saying collection and preparation of materials is moving fast, but selling onwards is difficult because recycled and recovered materials are often more expensive. How much of a problem is that in terms of sales?
I think that one problem within this reuse recycling field is that the used products are, when you're done with it, it's waste, and then you're handling as waste. But we see a resource. I think we need to be handling these resources in a more efficient way in order to see that this isn't waste, we can use it in another way, and to handle it with care. Because when we do that, we are creating more opportunities to use these products as a resource instead of waste. And I think that the society as a whole are starting to realize that we need to reuse, we need to be more careful about the resources that are already produced. It's plenty of water and energy put in these products. And I think that within the transition to a circular economy and the transition to the new society, we are seeing the actual climate footprint of these products, and then we realize that we need to do something more. Plenty of commercials out there that we are using too many jeans as I saw on TV. So I think this that the word is out.
So maybe then a question to Arash is, clearly the value chain it's all sort of needs to be constructed in a sector. How is Alder thinking? Can you imagine going in and seeing, okay, there's a value chain here, one part of it, we invest in one part of it, but then it needs other investments along the way, maybe to move a value chain forward. Is that something you think about? And are there any other sectors that you're looking at? Two questions in one.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And when thinking about also changing the value chains, you can either go ambitious, but you can also just start where you stand and start digging. So in the case of Autocirc, for example, it just brings a whole new set of value chains. For example, electricity, or in every running car going forward, probably be 4 wheels and an iPad. So you will have a lot of sensors and metals and everything else around it. And that is just a simple example. I think Hanna is much more sophisticated now, talking about how you can go into clothing or using plastics or glasses for other applications. But for us, thinking about, or also, for example, the battery, if we think about, okay, the battery can be used in housing or part of storage of electricity and capacity. And that also brings us maybe to the second part of the question, what other sectors? One where we are focusing quite a lot is around housing or building efficiency as such, what you can do with whether solar, geothermal, heating pumps, and how you can link that together, because also it's similar. A lot of electricity, a lot of infrastructure, and a lot of cost and energy going to heating as a simple example. So from our perspective, it's really about, yes, what are the easiest if you just start digging where you stand? And from the concept of Autocirc, I think they have, the team here has come much further than we have, but we are also trying just and building efficiency has become one of the topics, and there we can really spin on heating and the opposite of heating, it's cooling, and how you can use, for example, which is to me was somewhat innovative, but in essence very common sense, where you have actually municipalities, as an anecdote, building now swimming halls next to an ice rink. And you're saying, but hang on, why should I go, ice skating or going for a swim? But actually it's just the opposite, because one place you need cooling and the other place you need heating. And those are just the opposite of the same thing.
Yeah, no, these kind of ideas are clearly emerging. So just before we wrap up, we have one more question here. We've talked about stakeholders, even if I think I made that a little bit confusing. But we did have a conversation about your decision to invest. And a follow-up question here. What are the 2 to 3 data points required for an investment decision when you're looking at common sense, creativity, and impact? What do you, I can imagine many people say, why don't we invest in everything that's a great idea? But clearly you have 2 or 3 data points that you need. Maybe we have about 2 minutes. You could just give us a sense.
Yeah. I think at least, and now I'm putting the Alder glasses on, so I think that maybe this is not the holy grail of answers, but I think ultimately looking at business models and having a business let's say model with price points, customers, suppliers, and profitability in some shape and form, I think it's a must-have ultimately, because then there's economics behind it. If it's just sustainability, but the model is based on subsidies or government policies or regulations or taxonomy driven or anything else, it's ultimately a business model that doesn't stand on its own.
Yeah.
So I think for us, it basically boils down to one data point. Is there an existing business model today that stands on its own? If that is checked, then we can go from there on and take all kinds of investment decisions of how do we want to grow, how innovative do we want to be, what adjacent verticals do we want to grow into, how we want to drive and push for that company or that investment. But it ultimately needs to stand on something that fundamentally goes around and makes, whereas customers, somebody's willing to pay for a product and you get profitability of some shape and form. I think that's the only data point ultimately.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. Have to say, when I've been looking at Autocirc together with Hanna, we've been working together on the taxonomy. It's been very exciting to see what you're doing. And Arash, thank you very much for supporting and promoting this business model and Autocirc around. I hear there are exciting expansion plans as well. We don't have time for any more. The next Purple Ivy conversation will be about the kind of competencies that are needed for sustainability within companies. They are changing and getting even tougher. Hanna is a wonderful example of how brilliant a sustainability chief needs to be these days. There's lots and lots of demands, but lots of opportunities as well. So we'll be talking to Sustainagies on May the 23rd, on May 13th, and then to Lisen Schultz from Stockholm Resilience Centre on May the 20th, and she runs a course for CEOs. So I'm hoping all of you will join for that. Thank you very much, and I'm hoping everybody enjoyed the conversation. Have a great. I hope you've got time for lunch now, you two. Bye.
Of course. Bye. Thank you very much for having us.
Bye. Bye.